The executive branch is the body of the government that has its authority and responsibility for the daily administration of the state. The executive branch executes or enforces the law. The divisions of power into separate branches of government is central to the idea of the separation of powers. The Constitution of America, Article 2, subsection 1. The executive power, so you're seeing that, the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and, together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected. So, the President of the United States holds the executive power on behalf of America. The Constitution of Canada, 1867, Article 9. The executive government and authority of and over Canada is hereby declared to continue and be vested in the Queen. The Russian Constitution, the executive branch. The 1993 Constitution created a dual executive consisting of a president and prime minister, but the president is the dominant figure. The Constitution of the Russian Federation, Article 80, subsection 2. The President of the Russian Federation shall be the guarantor of the Constitution of the Russian Federation, of the rights and freedoms of man and citizen. So we're going to be looking at the government structure within America, Russia, and Canada. Now this works out with most governments here in the world, but I couldn't add all these countries on my board, so we're going to stick with the three. Now, the government structure is set up that they are running or they are ruling through executive power. Executive powers. Now, in the United States of America, this comes forth through the Constitution Act of America, Article 2, subsection 1, where it says the President, he is the executive powers of America. He operates the executive powers of America. In Canada, it's the Constitution Act of Canada, 1867, Article 9, 10, 11, and 12. There it talks about the Queen, how the executive powers have been continued to be vested in the Queen, yet the Queen transfers her power and her authority into the Governor General's office. In the Russian Constitution, it talks about the fact that the President of Russia and the Prime Minister of Russia both have executive powers. However, the President is primary in that situation. Now, when an individual like you and I are seeking the administration of justice or are seeking to exercise our fundamental rights and freedoms, in America and Canada, it's the Attorney Generals who have been charged with the duties and responsibility of upholding our fundamental rights and freedoms. In Russia, however, it's a little different. It's actually the President who's the guarantor of their fundamental rights and freedoms. In the Constitution Act of Russia, Article 80.2, it specifically states that the President of the Russian Federation is the guarantor of man and citizen concerning their fundamental rights and freedoms. So, as you work through the law in America and Canada, you will come to see that the executive powers have turned over the administration of justice to the Attorney Generals. And it's these guys, the Attorney Generals, that we need to contact when we first begin exercising our rights and freedoms. And if you're Russian, then it would be the office of the President that you would need to contact concerning the exercising of your fundamental rights and freedoms. Tacit. Tacit refers to something done or made in silence, as in a tacit agreement. A tacit understanding is manifested by the fact that no contradiction or objection is made, and is thus inferred from the situation and the circumstances. Tacit. That which, although not expressed, is understood from the nature of the thing or from the provision of the law. Implied. When you look at United States of America, the office of the President holding executive powers, you hear recently within the past 8 years, and even before with George Bush, how they would bring forth laws, and then without having Congress vote upon them, they would sign them into existence. They would sign them and they would be given force of law, and then they would be put upon the people. That was using executive powers. That's the power of that office. Now, the executive powers of our governments, whether it's Canadian, United States of America, or Russia, are holding us under a tacit agreement. That's what it's called in law, a tacit agreement, okay? Now, they're saying that we tacitly agreed to be designated a citizen, whether it's a citizen of the Russian Federation, an American citizen, or a Canadian citizen. They're saying we tacitly agreed to play this role, to play this designation. Now, none of us were born citizens. We were born men and women. We were born human beings. And subsequent to that, we can take on the role, we can play the designation of citizen. Just like a man is born naturally, and as he grows up and gets an education, he then plays the role of police officer, or plays the role of mayor, or plays the role of politician. These are designations you can take on. You're not born that way. We're born men and women, and then the government, the executive powers of your local governments, they say you tacitly agree to be designated a citizen, and they begin to treat you like a citizen. Now, since you never raised any objection, and you never stated any contradiction to this fact here, that you would be considered a citizen, that's how the tacit agreement is made. Their stance is, you never said anything. You never notified us, you never told us, you never objected. Therefore, in our books, you agreed, you accepted. That's how they get us. Now, in this designation, or under this designation, you are then held accountable to the rules, regulations, and laws that the executive branches are making. Whether they go against your fundamental rights or freedoms, irregardless. Why? Because you're in the position of citizen. It's not until you tell the executive powers, hey, hang on, first and foremost, I'm a man or a woman, and I have fundamental rights and freedoms, and I can play the role, I can enter into the role of citizen, but if I enter into the role of citizen and you're removing my fundamental rights and freedoms, I don't accept. I won't play that role. I'll stay in my natural capacity. So every one of us are born natural as men and women, and through a tacit agreement, they designate us citizen. Now, I know for myself, growing up, I was never brought officially to anyone to take the oath of citizenship here in Canada. And speaking to most of my friends who I grew up in school, no one was taken officially before any representative to take the official oath of Canadian citizenship. So while all of us are claiming that we are Canadian citizens and that we are here in Canada under citizenship, none of us has actually taken the official citizenship. What has happened is they have granted us the right to citizenship through our parents. They have tacitly said we agree to this citizenship because our parents were. Therefore, automatically you become a citizen. And because you raised no objection, and because you said no contradiction to that fact, it's assumed in law you are accepted. So if I go forward now into a court of law, and I start screaming and yelling, hey, my rights have been not respected, you've abridged them, you've removed them against the Constitution, whatever it may be, the state party's position, America's position, Canada's position, Russia's position will be, you never said anything. Why are you huffing and puffing? You never told us anything. We automatically assume that you agreed. I know it's all bull garbage, okay? I know it's all bull garbage, but that would be their legal position. That could be their stance against you. That's why it's so important when you first start this, that you take your claim and you send them a proper claim, a claim to your recognition, a claim to who you are, to break this tacit agreement that says you must be the citizen at all times. No, I'll assume the role of citizen to my benefit, but if the role of citizen breaches my fundamental rights and freedoms, I'm not playing the game. In Russia, Canada, and America, the supreme law is the Constitution. That's the supreme law. Traffic laws, bylaws, any other regulation or statutes are not the supreme law. They're secondary, they're submissive to the supreme law, to the Constitution. Now, we know that the Constitution Acts in our countries are bringing forth the international covenants and the rights and freedoms expressed in the international covenants. In America, the operation of law to bring forth these rights is called the Supremacy Act. Through the Supremacy Act, the international covenants come into the Constitution, and these together become the supreme law of the land. In Canada, it's the Constitution Act of Canada, 1982, and when you look at it more specifically in Article 52, it states that the Constitution Act of Canada is the supreme law of Canada. In Russia Constitution, it's Article 4.2, where it states that the Russian Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And the Russian Constitution and the Canadian Constitution and the American Constitution, again, all bring out our fundamental rights and freedoms that are contained in the International Covenant. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 2, subsection 2. It states, where not already provided for, by existing legislative or other measures, each state party to the present covenant undertakes to take the necessary steps in accordance with its constitutional process, and with the provisions of the present covenant, to adopt such laws or other measures as may be necessary to give effect to the rights recognized in the present covenant. It wasn't like the leaders of Russia, Canada, and the United States of America just woke up one morning and said, hey, you know what? Let's sign on and let's implement the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights willfully. Let's just do it ourselves. It's not what happened. They became signatories to this covenant in 1976, March 23rd, and as such, a legal obligation passed upon these nations. In Article 2.2 of the covenant, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, but you find them in both covenants, it states that we're not already provided for by existing legislative or other measures. Each state party to the present covenant undertakes or promises that they will take steps to include the rights and freedoms in their constitution, or that they will adopt laws or other measures to give effect to these rights and freedoms. So therein lie their obligation upon the United States, Russia, and Canada, the executive powers. You signed on to this, now you are obligated. Now these rights and freedoms that are being brought forth in the covenant, you must express them through your constitution or adopt other ways to express them, but you have to give effect to these rights and freedoms, whether they're for man or woman, or whether they're for the citizen. You are now under obligation. You flip that, and that's great for me and you as individuals. Why? Because it's something we can point to now and say, you, executive powers, have an obligation, and your obligation is coming out of this article of law internationally. In the International Covenants, in Article 2.2, it states you have the obligation to bring forth these rights and freedoms. So what transpires? The obligation is in the International Covenant under Article 2.2. Obligation says, bring forth the fundamental rights and freedoms. Canada, in 1982, creates a new Constitution Act. This new Constitution Act is an expression of the rights and freedoms internationally. They expressed most of them in there. And what they didn't, they left the rest in Article 26, which says that Canada recognizes other rights and freedoms that have not been mentioned in the Constitution Act. What did Russia do? In 1993, Russia creates a new Constitution Act, 1993. And within it, they explain what this Constitution is about. And as I talked about in my last video, they were more open. They actually used the term of man and citizen, where Canada hid the term of man or human being. Now we come down to America or to Russia. Okay, to America, here's your obligation. Bring forth the rights, America. And what happens? They don't bring forth it through a new Constitution Act. They go in and they declare a reservation and an understanding. And they say, we accept these laws, we accept these rights and freedoms. However, here in America, they're not self-executing. So where the code in the international law said you can adopt these rights and freedoms through the Constitution Act or through other laws or other measures, America used another way, other laws or other measures. Said, yeah, we accept these rights and freedoms, but they're not self-executing. And the only way an individual is ever going to be able to exercise these rights or have us respect these rights is if they figure it all out. And if they contact the right office. and if they begin to lay charges against the executive government of saying, you are not respecting my fundamental rights and freedoms according to your obligation. So here in Canada, it's pretty easy. We can go into the Constitution Act when you begin to understand laws, and you can start pulling them out. And you got case file, and Supreme Court cases and Superior Court cases that back you up. Same thing in Russia. In America, it's hide and seek. If you don't know what you're doing, it's hit and miss. Again, all this starts with bringing forth our rights and freedoms internationally. Obligation fell upon the state party, you have to do it. So we see them doing it. New Constitution Act for Canada, New Constitution Act for Russia. In America, something called Supremacy Clause brings in the international covenants, but they make a reservation, say, well, these rights are not self-executing. If a man's going to execute them, if a man's going to use them, they're going to have to stand up and declare that they have them. International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 5. Nothing in the present covenant may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms recognized herein, or at their limitation to a greater extent than is provided for in the present covenant. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 4. In the time of public emergency, which threatens the life of the nation, and the existence of which is officially proclaimed, the states parties to the present covenant may take measures derogating from their obligations under the present covenant to the extent strictly required by the exigence of the situation provided. Now, no derogation from Articles 6, 7, 8, 11, 15, and 16, or 18 may be made under this provision. Now we look at what Article 8 and 16 mentions. It says in Article 8, no one shall be held in servitude. And Article 16 says, everyone shall have the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. So in a time of emergency, when they want to make emergency laws, rules and regulations, these two articles, these two fundamental rights and freedoms, they stand. They cannot be removed, they cannot be abridged, they cannot be denied. You forever have the right to take recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Flip side of that is you do not have to take recognition. And even in a time of emergency, no one can be held in servitude. Servitude to laws and servitude to individuals. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights reads as follows. Nothing in the present covenant may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights or freedoms recognized herein, or at their limitation to a greater extent than is provided for in the present covenant. That's what the law states directly. And again, guess what? That produces an obligation upon the executive powers in the United States of America, in Canada, and in Russia. So the state party, no state, group, or person. It's funny when you look at that, because when you study the structure of the government, you see America, the executive power is given to the president. In Canada, who? The Governor General, or the Queen. It's a person who has it. And the law says that they don't have any right to engage in any action or to perform or to take any action to limit or remove a right or freedom apart from what the covenant allows them to do. So the covenant's going to list a number of rights. When you study it, you're going to see a whole bunch of rights that are listed in the covenant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and an innumerable number of rights that are listed. And after that, they're going to say this right can be limited in such and such a case. So they're going to state a right and they're going to say it could be limited but only in this capacity. And then at other times, you're going to see a right expressed and it's going to say this right here can never be limited and never be abridged. And the state party, Canada, Russia, or America, has that obligation. You have to allow your people, shouldn't use that word, you have to allow your individuals, you have to allow your men and women to exercise these rights and freedoms, and you can never remove them. You can never abridge them or limit them in any situation, even in emergency. So when you look into the Emergencies Act of Canada, you see it coming out. There's making a declaration in the time of war, in a time of emergency, or situation of the like, the Governor General can make laws, temporary laws, in this situation. However, in making these laws, he has to give respect, he has to be aware of the rights and freedoms that can never be limited or abridged, that come out of the civil and political covenants. And we see that coming directly out of the International Covenant, Article 4.2. It states that in an emergency, the state parties can make extra laws. So a nuclear bomb goes off, oh, you can make extra laws because it's an extraordinary situation. War breaks out, oh, you can make laws because it's an extraordinary situation. However, it says that even during this time, if you make laws, there are certain fundamental rights and freedoms that these laws cannot limit or cannot abridge. And that works together with Article 5, stating that yes, you can limit or abridge rights, but only as the covenant allows. And if you stay with me and walk with me through some of my older videos and some of that I'm going to put out in the future, I'm going to show you what the covenant allows to be limited and what the covenant doesn't allow to limit. And that is the obligation the state party has. Now, in a time of emergency or at any time, okay, the state party cannot limit the right or freedom that we find in Article 8.2 of the covenant or Article 16 of the covenant. So whatever rights 8.2 or 16 is expressing, you who are watching my video right now, you have those rights. You have that fundamental right, those fundamental rights and freedoms, and they can never be taken away from you. Now, you may not be exercising them because you don't understand what's transpiring in your life, but nevertheless, you possess something right now. You have something right now that can never be limited or abridged if you begin to use it. No state party, no one can come to you now and take that away from you going forward if you begin to use it. And what are these two rights? Well, 8.2 says that no one shall be held in servitude. So in Canada, when you're looking at the oath of allegiance, I swear allegiance to the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, the Queen of Canada. I pledge my allegiance to her. I go into servitude to her. I become her subject and servant. I promise that I will obey the laws of Canada. I will fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen. That's servitude. The flip side of that, in America, I pledge allegiance to the flag, the American flag, and to the republic for which it stands. When you mention the republic for which it stands, it's talking about the executive powers. It's talking about a head of a state. That's what it's talking about, the head of the state. Okay, that's not a monarchy government. Now, the head of the state in the United States of America is the office of the presidency. Right now it's Obama. The individual changes. The office remains the same. The executive power remains the same. Now, a very, very powerful right that every human being, every man or woman possesses is brought forth in Article 16 of the International Covenants, where it says that everyone, every man, every woman, every child has the right to recognition as a person before the law. And if you don't understand what that means, it's because you're lacking a little bit of understanding. Go and watch some videos on my YouTube concerning what the person is. I think there's one that I titled Deceived to 34 million or something like that. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel talking about the person in law. Go and see what that represents. Now, a person in law is something that you can take recognition as. The article of law says everyone has the right to take recognition as a person in law. Now, a right doesn't produce an obligation. Again, most of us watching this, we all have a right to vote, okay, because we're classed as citizens. Now, come voting time, they will not come and knock on your door and say, hey, you better go and use your right to vote. You have to exercise the right to vote. No. Why? Because a right never produces an obligation. It produces a choice. So the law in the International Covenant, it says everyone has the right, not obligation, the right to recognition as a person before the law. So I can step in and play the role of person, citizen, or I don't have to. That's my choice. And that right can never be limited or abridged. Even in an emergency, even in any law that they create, they're not supposed to force me to take recognition as a person in law. They're doing it. Why? Because many of us don't understand this. We don't know our rights and freedoms. We don't know the obligation the state party has. So they're walking all over us. But when we begin to wake up and understand the obligation they have, and that we can hold them to this obligation, then we can start to exercise our rights. So we cannot be held in servitude at any time, And we cannot be forced. We cannot be forced to take recognition as a person in law. So a person in law, let's use a citizen for example. You could say that's an artificial person, that's a person in law. Now a citizen, right, in Canada, listen to this, in Financial Administration Act, Article 19, it says that the Governor and Council can charge a fee, okay, for a license or a permit, okay, for a right that's going to be conferred upon the citizen by her Majesty the Queen. So a citizen has to pay money to have a right conferred upon them or given to them. Here in Canada, it's by Her Majesty the Queen. In America, it would be by the executive or the state powers. So where you can, as a human being, as a man or a woman, you have the right, a lawful right, a lawful and now legal because of these constitutions, but a lawful right to fish or to hunt. The state party will say, no, you can't partake of those actions unless you first pay me some funds, then we will confer upon you as citizen the right to take such actions. Purchase your right. That's what they're doing. So, through all this, we have fundamental rights and freedoms that cannot be limited or abridged. Now, starting at it, they're already being limited. From when we're born, like the Tacit Agreement, remember? They take us out of the designation of man or woman and place us into the designation of citizen. And because we haven't said anything, to contradict what has been transpired or what has been done to us, now we've lost the right to be recognized as a person before the law, and we've lost the right not to go into servitude. And remember what I said in the last video I made. I said these rights as men and women, if you don't exercise them, then by default, you lose them. And maybe you didn't catch what I meant when I said that, but here you see the operation of it. You see, man and women have a right. You don't have to play the role of a person. You don't have to be in servitude, okay? But if you don't exercise those rights, what happened? As a citizen, they've rendered you a person. As a citizen, you're in servitude to the regulations, laws, and statutes. So it's of the most important that men and women learn their fundamental rights and freedoms and then begin to exercise them. Now the first step to doing that is a claim of recognition. And I cannot stress how important that is, because up till now, they have tacitly said, you agree to play the role of citizen, and you agree to be governed by these rules and regulations. And many of these rules and regulations have stripped us of our fundamental rights and freedoms. So a communique needs to go out with the proper office stating, whoa, hang on. Just in case you're wondering, just in case you didn't realize it, it's not as simple as that, but that's the basic of it. I am a man or a woman with fundamental rights and freedoms, and I'm aware that there have been many laws that have been created in this democracy. There's been many laws, statutes, and regulations that are stripping me of my fundamental rights and freedoms, and I'm no longer going to be submitting to them. I'm no longer willing to submit to them, and I will challenge them. Now, all this has to be built on proper lawful basis. You can't walk in there, like I spoke in my last video, and say, well, I have rights because God gave me them. They're not going to recognize it, even though it's maybe true in your own heart and maybe true in this own land. They're not going to recognize that. But if you say, hey, through the supremacy clause of the Constitution Act of America, you guys have an obligation to the international covenants. And the international covenants is an expression of my fundamental common law rights that have been in existence for many generations. And these rights are not self-executing here in America. And I've woken up to that fact. And I've realized that you're putting me in servitude to laws, and you're forcing me to play a role as an artificial entity, as an artificial person that I don't want to play. And these are contrary to my fundamental rights and freedoms recognized internationally. Now you have the obligation to respect me as an individual and not to put me in that. You are breaching Article 5 of the covenant itself, which says you will not take any actions engaged to limit or abridge my rights or freedoms. That would be the type of communique going a bit deeper to the United States of America. The same thing with Russia. You would build it out of the Constitution Act of Russia and the rights and freedoms that are enumerated there. Call on the responsibility. You express who you are. You bring forth the obligation through your claim of recognition. And then you begin to exercise your rights. If you're denied, limited, or abridged these rights, then you're going to be seeking the administration of justice. That's what you would be doing in a court of law. But the starting process of this is claiming your rights back, claiming to them and letting them know, hey, I understand what's going on. I know I have fundamental rights and freedoms and they're being limited and abridged. You have to start at that point. So when you begin to exercise your right, if you're denied, okay, you can point back to the fact that, hey, well, listen, I told you ahead of time. I let you know ahead of time that I would be doing this. I would be exercising my rights. Now you have accountability to me. Before, if I didn't tell you and then you intercepted me or you tried to enforce state policy above my individual rights, I'd have nothing to stand on. I'd be like, well, I just figured it out, so I began to exercise my rights. At least in law, I took the step to notify you and let you know, hey, okay, you have obligations to me according to the international covenants. It's the supreme law of this land here, and now I will be exercising my rights. And if you deny me them, I'll be seeking the administration of justice against your party, against what you're doing to me. That would be a primary step. Now, what rights you want to exercise, that's up to the individual. There's many rights that are expressed in the covenant. And I'm going to talk about certain rights in my next video. And I'm going to talk about taxation, because I see that a lot of people are bothered by this. And there's a lot of schemes out there that talk about taxation and how to be free from taxation, and why does the federal or the IRS tax you, and it's not right that they tax you. Remember, all our domestic law, okay, all of it is controlled by international law. So somewhere within these international covenants, within international law, there has to be a right for the state party to tax, okay? They couldn't just wake up in one morning and say, today I'm going to tax, let's go. That'd be against international law. That would be against their obligations. So somewhere within the international covenants, there's an expression that says the state party, whether it be Russia, Canada, America, whoever signs on to the covenants, are going to have the right to create a mode of taxation. Now, when you study the covenants, it doesn't actually use the word taxation. It doesn't actually talk about taxes as general. We come to learn that what we are giving is called a tax. That's how we come to learn it. But when the covenants talk about it, they talk about contributions. Now right away when you use that word contribution, it denotes a choice. Contribution is not something that's forced. I can't be forced to contribute. It's an oxymoron. I have to willfully contribute. Now, the article of law in the covenant, it states that all people have the right of self-determination, and by virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status. Okay? But the article goes on deeper, and it says that no people can be forced to contribute to a society based upon the principle of mutual benefit. So no people can be forced to contribute to a society based upon the principle of mutual benefit. And isn't that what we're taught that taxation is within our state parties? They say, well, you have to contribute, you have to give a donation, you have to pay your part because it's for the mutual benefit of the society. And therefore you have to give, you've got no choice. But yet, however, when you look into international law, that's not what the law is saying. The law doesn't say that the people must contribute to a society based upon the principle of mutual benefit. Done deal, we tax you, you have to give. You're going to be part of the society, you have to give a contribution. End of story. No, the covenant does just the opposite. It says that the people cannot be forced to contribute to the society based upon the principle of mutual benefit, and goes even deeper. It says the resources that the people earn, whether through working, wealth, or whatever it may be, it's your resources to use for your subsistence. It belongs to the individual man or woman to use to sustain their life. And if they decide to give a contribution, that's the choice internationally, not the obligation. And that's in the International Covenants, Article 1. But you also look at it in Article 47. It restates it. And this is the only right within all the covenants. This is the only right that is stated twice. So you can see the covenant starts at Article 1 and goes down to, I can't remember exactly what article, but let's say 55 or 59. So they got 59 articles of law there. Now they talk about Article 16. Everyone has the right to recognition as a person before the law. So it mentions the right, talks about what we can or cannot do, and that's it. It goes on to something else. But when it comes to taxation, when it comes to contributions, the covenant talks about it in 2 articles of law. And in both articles of law, it strictly says that the people have the right to decide if they will contribute to the society based upon the principle of mutual benefit. And in no way, in no shape, in no form, can the people be forced to make a contribution. So when these societies who operate on behalf of the government come under their enactments or regulations, and they say to you, you must contribute, you must pay a taxation to us, you have no choice. The enactment, the regulation, the taxation regulation says you have to contribute. That's breaching international law. Because international law says that the individual, the people, the person, the citizen has the right to decide if they will contribute or not. Now you're creating domestic enactments or regulations that are saying we must contribute. Therefore, your party is in breach of Article 5 of the International Covenant, which says that you cannot take any actions aimed at the destruction or to limit these rights or freedoms more than the covenant allows you to do. And when it comes to what you are calling taxation contributions, the covenant strictly says that we have the right to decide, will we contribute or will we not contribute? And that you as a state party cannot remove our resources from us to force a contribution. But yet you are directly doing that. So you are directly in violation to the obligation to the international covenants. And when an individual understands that, then they have the legal and the lawful capability to hold the executive powers responsible. So what would transpire in a situation like that? You understand your right. You understand the state party. They're allowed to create a taxation system. International law says they can create a taxation system. International law says it can be up in an operation. But what international law says is that they cannot force you as that individual to make a contribution. That's where they're stepping over the line. They're staying on the line when they create these systems. They're stepping over the line when they're saying, we can force you through our domestic enactment or regulations to give us your money. Whoa, now you've breached international law. Because in no case can you force the people to contribute to the society based upon the principle of mutual benefit. And you must follow the international covenants. And you cannot limit or abridge my rights or freedoms that are expressed in the covenant more than the covenant allows you. And in Article 1 and 47, it does not allow you at all to force me to contribute. So you would have to go to the judiciary of your system and seek the administration of justice under this situation, saying that there's an enactment or a regulation that is forcing you to contribute, and this is contrary to the international obligation that Russia, Canada, or America has, according to these articles of law. And then the judiciary, the supreme powers of your land, would have to agree with you, because they have the responsibility to uphold international law and to uphold our fundamental rights and freedoms. Many people are looking for schemes or looking for ways to get out of paying a taxation. It's not a scheme. You don't have to look for a scheme. It's a right. It's enumerated and listed and brought forth in the international covenants. Very clear. In both covenants. In the civil political covenant and on the economic social covenant. Both of these covenants bring forth the right, and both of them bring it forth twice. So that's how important it was to the international community when they made up these covenants. They saw that nations were implementing systems of taxation. And they said, okay, you're allowed to implement your system of taxation, but what you're not allowed to do is force a contribution. And they come to us, and when we're young, we learn, oh, we have to pay our part. We have to contribute to this society. It's based upon the principle of mutual benefit, and we have to give our part. And if we don't give our part, the society is going to fall apart. That's a video for another day. You know, I talk to some individuals, and other people share this story with me also, and they say they'll talk to individuals, and the individual will be like, you know, I hate having to pay taxes, and I'm taxed at the gas station, and I'm taxed when I buy food, I'm taxed when I buy this, and then when I go to work I'm taxed, and I'm fed up of taxation, and I wish I wasn't taxed. And then the individual who are aware of their rights, they'll simply say, do you know that contribution was a choice? It's a right, and a right doesn't produce an obligation, and it's your choice if you will contribute or not, according to law. Now what they're doing is a different story, but according to international law, you have the right to decide. And then they come back, well, if we don't pay taxes, what's going to happen to the system? If we don't pay a contribution, then how we're going to pay for the roads, or how we're going to pay for this? And on one side, just 2 minutes ago, they were attacking the system and they were mad at it because they were being torn apart. But now you threw some freedom at them and some liberty at them, and their spirit didn't understand how to react. They didn't know how to take that into them, and what came out was an attack. What came out was well, how can that be possible? And, we can't support the system. And they don't even realize that they're flipping and flopping like that, because it's a conditioned response that's been put into us. It's a conditioned way that we behave. We're told that, you have to do your part. If you don't do your part, the system's going to fall apart. And I made a few videos on my website showing you what the finances are like here in Canada and what they do with them. And far and above that, we don't run on taxation. Yes, they put a little bit here and a little bit there, but there's so much resources in Canada. There's so much natural resources in Canada. If the Crown wouldn't allow these private corporations to strip away all our natural resources and put it in the bank account of one or two individuals who own these private corporations, there'd be enough wealth in this country, whether it be Russia, America, or Canada, to sustain all the systems and more that you would like to have for social systems. But they don't.
We're looking at the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 1, subsection 2. What I was talking about concerning contributions. Just feel like going on. All peoples may, for their own ends, freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources, without prejudice to any obligations arising out of international economic cooperation, based upon the principle of mutual benefit and international law. In no case may a people be deprived of its own means of subsistence. Now, it referred to people, and look when it uses a personal pronoun. It says, in no case may a people be deprived of its own means of subsistence. I didn't know that a people was an it, but that's a topic for another day. Here what you're seeing is that the people, they have the right to freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources without prejudice to any obligations arising out of international economic cooperation, based upon the principle of mutual benefit and international law. In no case may a people be deprived of its own means of subsistence. So in no way, in no how, in no way can they force you to make a contribution based upon the principle of mutual benefit. Now when you scroll down to Article 47 of this same covenant, I'll just scroll down there for you. You'll see exactly, it's restated again. Nothing in the present covenant shall be interpreted as impairing the inherent right of all peoples to enjoy and utilize fully and freely their natural wealth and resources. So as a people, as a member of the state, there's a right that you can exercise. And that right, that inherent right, is that you can utilize fully and freely your natural wealth and the resources that you create through working, through earning a living, and you have no obligation to make a contribution to a society based upon the principle of mutual benefit.
You can go to eternallyaware.com. Look on the home page there, you have different pages. You can find one that's called Claim of Recognition. I believe that's the title of it. You can go there and you can ask me, hey, I need some help to make up a claim of recognition, whether you're from USA, Canada, or Russia. Just contact me there through that way.